Is there any reason to discuss the first Super Mario Bros.? Is there anything about it that has not already been chronicled, dissected, praised, criticized, loved, hated, or retrospected for the 1000th time? Maybe not, but each game has a story worth telling, even on the briefest of terms. In this video, I will be taking a look at the first two entries in the proper Super Mario Bros. Series. When I started this, I wasn't sure how much I had to say about either. The first game is one of the cornerstones of video games, and the second, known as the Lost Levels here in the US, is just something with a wholly different legacy. And while I did play the original on NES numerous times as a kid, I never actually owned an NES. My time with these games was primarily through the Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color, and because of their screen alone, these are very different experiences. I will revisit that toward the end, but most of the commentary will be based around the actual NES or Famicom versions playing via the Nintendo Switch Online. Having just looked at those initial entries with the arcade titles like Donkey Kong and Mario Bros., or at least their Famicom and NES ports, Super Mario Bros. Was the natural evolution to the formula, going from platforming on static set pieces to expanding on the best of what each of those early titles had to offer, took the gaming world by storm. It surely single-handedly revived the dying video game industry in the West. The market had been overrun by repetitive, stagnant technology and shovelware, but the team at Nintendo R&D4, while not necessarily thinking solely of the Western market, had big plans. Spearheaded by the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, this team had cut their teeth on games like Excitebike and Kung Fu Master. With these games, they had honed their skills programming games with a side-scrolling nature as their foundation. While I have never played it, looking briefly into the gameplay of Kung Fu Master was incredibly eye-opening. The game shares plenty of foundational design features with Super Mario. The timer and how remaining time at the end of the level adds to your score, enemies coming from both sides of the screen, introducing projectiles, then also obstacles or enemies dropping in from above. While surely dated, even Thomas and Sylvia can be likened to that of Mario and Peach in the first game. You can see some pretty evident mechanical inspirations for bullet bills and Lakitus here, and just how much the team expanded on these ideas without doing so arbitrarily. This game, and its creators, have undeniable footprints all over the gaming industry and pop culture. They produced one of the first games that comprehensively redefined home console games, and did so in a way that was genuinely replayable, beyond simply going for a higher score. It was fun, and in the process it redefined fun. But how do you top that? When you have created a new standard for an entire industry, what do you do to improve upon it? Arriving in Japan for the Famicom disk system on June 3, 1986, the turnaround time with Super Mario Bros. 2, or the Lost Levels as it would later become known in the US, was roughly 9 months after the original. All things considered, this is a pretty short development cycle. With Lost Levels, Miyamoto and the team had their sights set primarily on making the concept more challenging. In their eyes, that would also be objectively fun. This idea, at least in part, evolved from an arcade version of SMB titled Versus Super Mario Bros. That was released in North America in March of 1986, and in summary, this game had more enemies, less power-ups, and generally more difficult and precise obstacles and platforming. This was intentional, as an arcade title is somewhat inherently designed to keep the coins coming. One of the most bothersome facts of that, for me anyway, is the leap of faith concept this game included. This type of platforming challenge in certain levels is something that would be very prevalent in Lost Levels. I don't know that Miyamoto and company ever really felt like The Lost Levels was a true sequel. There is no doubt it was something that R&D4 truly wanted to do, and they put sincere time, effort, and pride into it. But with that team's ingenuity, I think they knew they could aspire to ultimately put together something that evolved the formula and the visuals more. But what else would you call it if not Super Mario Bros. 2? Using the increased power of the Famicom disk system, there were some improvements to the visuals. The bricks had some slightly improved shading, and the backgrounds were more detailed, with some more detailed mountains and greenery. The trees and clouds and mushrooms all had their trademark eyes added as well. This game took the higher difficulty concept of Versus Super Mario Bros. And turned it on its head. Things like poison mushrooms, warp zones that take you backwards, super springs, red piranha plants, and those aforementioned long-distance jumps, where your intended landing spot is off-screen, or even needing to launch off of an enemy that is waiting off-screen as well. These are all staples of this game, and not just one-offs in a few levels. I think the poison mushrooms and red piranha plants are genuinely good ideas that organically added complexity to the gameplay. The poison mushrooms are a simple power-up bait and switch where technically all you have to do is avoid. When that is packaged with enemies and the mushroom often being placed in between pipes and blocks where it will bounce back and forth until you move on, that is a simple change that you can create plenty of satisfying scenarios from. While a green piranha plant won't come out once you are standing directly next to the pipe, red piranhas don't stop until you are properly on the pipe. Having to time consecutive jumps from pipe to pipe is genuinely challenging and fun, but that can often be compounded with exceedingly large gaps when a single pipe just isn't enough of a runway. When you combine these with enemies like Hammer Bros or Lakitus, that is where it gets into the difficulty level associated with this game. I think the Super Springs and Leaps of Faith are absolute crap though. With the Super Springs, you simply cannot see where you are once you have been launched. Some of them are destined for long distances, and some don't come with anywhere near as big of a gap. But in either case, once you are launched into the air, you can have somewhat of a feel for where you are going, but there really is no way to pinpoint where you're landing until it's too late and you see yourself sailing down the screen just off the mark of where you needed to be. What's even worse in that formula is the occasional use of wind. The wind may be my overall least favorite quote-unquote mechanic of this game, and that even gets packaged in with those blind leaps of faith once or twice as well. In 2010, Miyamoto provided some quick insight into the thought process behind Lost Levels via an interview for Super Mario's 25th anniversary. He pointed out the sticker on the box that informed the buyer it was for quote-unquote super players. But how serious was that warning? It is unimaginable where this series may have ended up if Howard Phillips didn't have the guts to tell Nintendo that the original Super Mario Bros. 2 would never sell in North America. This game is so much more than the skill difference between players in Japan versus the US. It was an exercise in what it meant to have little to no restraint or consideration for the player. And that is saying a lot in an era where many games were padded by difficulty, and most didn't have the ability to save progress. As an acknowledgement of the difficulty level, they intentionally inserted multiple opportunities for the 1-up exploit, including via one just of the very first enemies you see in the game. They knew what they were doing, but I just have to think if they really knew why. I plan on covering the US version of Super Mario Bros. 2 in a future video, but I find it so weird to think about how the first sequels for both Mario and Zelda have such checkered past. I happen to think Zelda 2 is a really fun game when you view it in a certain context and cop to using a guide for the overworld navigation, but Lost Levels frankly just does not deserve that same grace.
アメリカではあとロストレベルとして出したんですけど、皆さんどうなんですか？やっぱり難しすぎますか？
As an aside, I find this ironic in that the 2D Mario series eventually landed on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. Lost Levels is a jarringly bad time compared to the first. Super Mario Bros. 3 and World are some of the all-time 2D platformers and are even regarded as the best for some. But then it later devolved into that stale recycle of the new Super Mario Bros. Series with enhanced port after enhanced port. I mean, New Super Mario Bros. Wii came out when I was a sophomore in high school, and I ended up with New Super Mario Bros. On Switch some 11 years later and playing it for the first time. They aren't bad by any means, but when you include the base game on the Wii U as well, they were just so safe when you put it into the context of the same or overwhelmingly similar game being spread across 3 console generations before finally being supplanted by Wonder. The Luigi version is arguably one of the cooler things to come out of all this though, as it was a more challenging take on the series without making it blatantly impossible or inaccessible. But I also didn't feel like the 3DS entry was worthy much of being called a proper sequel either versus a glorified expansion pack. It was just more spectacle than substance there. Consider the jarring difference in playing these 2 games, then look at the first 2 Zelda games. One of them had the same team taking their original ideas and simply making it more challenging, but Zelda 2 had a different team, and they took a drastically different approach. I think Zelda 2 gets a bad rap for some really poor and potentially purposely hidden progression gating, but when you boil it down to the gameplay itself, it has some very interesting redeeming qualities and organic challenge to it. Now, not every facet of Zelda 2 gets that same grace to be sure, but the point I'm making is that Nintendo did not have a solid plan for how to capitalize on their best-selling games with the NES and Famicom just yet. These series subsequently established rigid formulas with an emphasis on containing the creativity of the developers within the confines of said formula. There are some redeeming qualities with Lost Levels. Every once in a while I did feel some genuine satisfaction, like the Red Piranha sequence in World 5-1, but for every one of those, there are scenarios like the wind in that very same level. 4-2 feels like a very fun time that makes me think this is why I come back to the NES Mario games. But the next level makes me want to walk away from the game and never look back. This game can only hurt you if you let it. If you have the right combination of time, skill, and patience to play it without save states, knock yourself out. But I would shamelessly recommend you save at the beginning of each level if you are looking to just get through the game and see what all the fuss is about. As a husband and father of 4, my playing time is just very limited, and I'm not about to spend it playing by 1986 rules. I would think these games would have included a save battery, saving your game at the beginning of each world were it financially feasible. Otherwise, Super Mario All-Stars and onwards would not have provided the opportunity for at the very least saving at the beginning of each world, and my rationale there is not isolated to just the Lost Levels. Now, the Famicom disc version of this game in Japan did have a save feature, but I'm not sure if that meant you could pick up from the last world you played, which I doubt it, but probably more a case of tracking how many times you had completed the game, which you have to do 8 times in order to unlock worlds A through D. I will give the Lost Levels credit for having this fantastical World 9. Worlds 1 through 8 feel like a cruel ROM hack, and World 9 looks like a more experimental, satisfying, and fun ROM hack. I have not played it, but it looks like an absolute trip with the crazy color palette and sincerely unique and more abstract level design. Levels 1 and 2 are above ground but underwater, and the palette swap of the bricks for the underwater level looks pretty cool. There are also instances of new enemies being underwater, like Alakatu and Hammer Brother. Level 3 is a sort of outdoor Bowser's Castle with a fake Bowser in it. But guess what? No matter how many lives you had after completing 8-4, you start with a single life for World 9. Again, for every genuinely neat thing, or when I attempt to give this game some credit, it completely undercuts itself. I can't really begin to touch on Worlds A through D. The base game is hard enough, and I have no intentions of completing it a second time, let alone 8 times. I suppose I don't hold any fault toward these worlds being as difficult as they probably are. Unlockables tend to either be purely for fun or an absolutely blistering challenge. But the prerequisite to unlocking them is blatant padding and just inexcusable. My story with discovering the Lost Levels as a kid was actually in a worse format than the original game itself. When we were kids, my brother and I had Super Mario Bros. Deluxe on our Game Boy Colors. All of the fun novelties of this game aside, like the red coins, Yoshi eggs, or Boo races, you can ultimately unlock the last levels by completing the game with a score of at least 300,000. As far as I know, this version only contains World 1 through 8, but with the screen crunch, I remember it being absolutely unbearable. I complain about some of the leaps of faith on the original version, and imagine that with a block or 2 less of visibility on either side. Now, like I said earlier, I can't base my opinion of Lost Levels on a version that is objectively worse, and if Nintendo felt that SMP Deluxe was worth revisiting, it would probably be included in the Switch Online catalog, which it's not. I try to shy away from hyperbolic statements, but I think Lost Levels is a legitimately subpar game that is just a product of a different time. If its creators ultimately disagreed, they would have simply packed and shipped it into the North American market. They instead took the reality of the situation to heart and made the best of an incredibly difficult scenario that risked the future of their newly established mascot and maybe even the company. I hope to cover the US version of Super Mario Bros. 2 soon, but I first want to know what you think. The Lost Levels certainly has its defenders, and I don't mean to disagree. Just not growing up with an NES, it's not something I can really get behind as an objectively good experience. Let me know your thoughts and memories with these games in the comments. I sincerely appreciate you for watching, and I hope to catch you all next time.